On Friday the 27th of June, 2025 be at the Parliament House Auditorium, Sydney. For the RUSI Australia 5th International Dialogue Recruit and Retain. Challenges in sustaining a defence force in a modern democracy. For more information and to register visit rusinsw.au/5 dialogue.
RUSI New South Wales is an independent, apolitical, not-for-profit public education institute that, since 1888, has been promoting informed debate on and enhancing public awareness and understanding of defence and national security issues. We are Australia's oldest think tank. We conduct monthly lectures and seminars, issue a monthly newsletter, provide research support through our extensive military and historical library located in the Anzac Memorial in Sydney's Hyde Park, and together with RUSI Australia, publish a national quarterly magazine called United Service, with informed articles addressing the latest defence and security issues.
Please note, this monthly update presents the geostrategic situation as at May 8, 2025. As often with these rapidly changing events, the monthly update can be out of date by the time the podcast is released. Current geostrategic issues. Authors are attributed in the credits. Articles have been assembled by the Royal United Service Institute of New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. Ukraine, weapon development. With the attrition of heavy weapons suffered by both sides in the conflict in the Ukraine, there has been an effort to use alternatives, repurposing civil items or producing items where speed of manufacture using readily available materials is possible. With regard to weaponry, there has been a proliferation of drones. Many are simply commercially produced models designed to capture images for tourist videos. Such as the DJI series manufactured commercially in China allow for a pilot with a remote control to guide it with a first-person view, FPV, of where the drone is going. Drones for around $2,000 can be controlled out to 20 kilometers and carry a 2 kilograms payload. The payload can be charge-initiated on contact. Even some of the commercial drones have artificial intelligence, AI, capability built in to avoid obstacles and return to base should the control signal fail. Manufacture of special-purpose drones has not been found to be difficult using commercially available components and technical expertise. Ukraine and Russia, along with other nations, have developed larger drones able to fly further and carry heavier payloads. Triggering is also possible for missiles and other munitions. AI can be used to guide the weapons when control signals are jammed. AI is simply a set of programmed instructions on a computer chip loaded in a device able to control a drone's actions. The speed, altitude, and location being fed into the program as variables by the uncrewed system's sensors, etc. Key battlefield variables such as the disruptive pattern camouflage of friendly and enemy uniforms, shape of vehicle identification symbols, flags, etc. being firmware instructions. The mission having been fed into the program as a set of instructions giving the location and nature of target, etc. Each of these variables has an if-then set of reaction programs. If target is wearing friendly camouflage, then do not attack. If mission site reached and vehicle has enemy identification symbols, then attack, etc. Recognize that programming has to be accurate or the mistakes can happen. A human who could misidentify a camouflaged uniform, or a helmet shape in low light or with smoke around, so too can a machine. Civilian transport has been drawn in. Commercial utes are great for launching drones. The soldiers manning them sadly only having at best body armor for protection. The Russians in particular have taken to using motorcycles. Unlike most other national armies, Russians have been users of motorcycles in reconnaissance roles for many years. The bikes are specialized, exhausts well muffled. With specialist motorcycles now in short supply, the need for combat mobility has seen the Russians press commercially available bikes into service. One concept was to give soldiers the speed and mobility to evade Ukrainian drones. The problem being that the commercial bikes are noisy, the soldiers being unable to detect a drone approaching from behind. Russians have also attempted to use the cycle-mounted soldiers in human wave attacks. On January 19, 2025, in the Donetsk Oblast, Russians attempted penetrate the heavily fortified Vyimka-Zvanivka defensive belt, which serves as a critical shield for Siversk, with a motorcycle-mounted human wave attack. The attack was not just repulsed, all but one of the 50-plus soldiers involved lay dead on the battlefield within a few minutes. Just like horse-mounted soldiers of old, cyclists offer a good target for machine guns and in 2025 grenade-carrying battlefield drones. Like horses, cycles can be of use in moving infantry close to an objective where they can be discarded under cover, and using fire and maneuver soldiers can advance on foot. A problem here too, the Russians seem to want to use the human waves that were successful in World War II, where lives did not matter. There were many more conscripts where the then dead came from. Russian soldiers that have to be volunteers in the Ukraine conflict are not so expendable. Fire and maneuver in the attack would be far more sensible. Sadly too, a bike holder cannot be used to hold the bridles to relocate the transport resources. If they want to use them again, riders have to go back to where their bikes were dumped. There is of course prospect of innovation. Commercially available e-bikes would solve the noise problem. There would be more challenges: the need for battlefield charging, how to deal with range restrictions, and bikes would not need to be governed to 25 km per hour. Then again, if similar problems can be solved for drones. If you run out of tanks, MiGs and APCs, something has to be used. Speaking of innovation, in the past few days, it has emerged that the Ukrainian armed forces achieved yet another first for 21st century warfare. They were able to shoot down at least one, and possibly two, Russian Su-30 fighter bombers from an uncrewed naval vessel in the eastern part of the Black Sea. It is not the first time this form of next-generation robotic warfare has occurred, however. Since the beginning of the February 2022 full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, uncrewed systems have been employed in an expanding range of missions by Ukraine and the Russians. As the war has progressed, Ukraine began to experiment with, and has now mastered, the development and employment of uncrewed aerial, maritime, and most recently, land strike systems. In the air, uncrewed systems were used in the early days of the Russian invasion and have since progressed to be a crucial, non-discretionary element of combined arms combat operations and long-range strike operations for the Ukrainian and Russian military organizations. At sea, a variety of modified small boats, jet skis, and semi-submersibles have been developed and used to strike Russian naval vessels and observation platforms in the Black Sea, forcing the Russians from the western parts of the sea and opening up Ukraine's maritime trade routes. On the ground, Ukraine and Russia have developed uncrewed ground vehicles for reconnaissance, mine-laying and clearance, logistic resupply, casualty evacuation, and assault missions. This expansion in the use of uncrewed systems in Ukraine has also resulted in a fast-moving adaptation battle, where drones are developed, deployed, and evolved with an increasing tempo. Software updates occur almost daily, and the tactics and technology of drones change every week. A more recent trend has been the use of uncrewed systems to carry and launch other uncrewed systems or long-range strike weapons. This trend, robotic teaming, has emerged over the past year with the advent of drone-on-drone combat in the air and on the ground. Russo-Ukrainian War, no end in sight. In the war on land, Russia continues to hold the upper hand. Ukraine's 7-month cross-border incursion from Ukraine's Sumy Oblast into Russia's Kursk Oblast, which began on August 6, 2024 and at its peak had seized over 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, had ended by March 16, 2025. The last Ukrainian forces withdrew from Kursk Oblast to new defensive positions along the Sumy-Kursk border. By May 8, these defensive positions included only a small foothold within Kursk near the border town of Tetkino. Ukrainian forces also invaded Belgorod Oblast in March-April and now hold some isolated pockets along the international border, but Ukraine now will be unable to use its occupation of significant Russian territory as a bargaining chip in any peace negotiations. Within Ukraine, by May 8, 2025, Ukrainian forces remained on the back foot along the 1,000 kilometers front line in eastern and southern Ukraine. While each side was making marginal tactical gains at various places, the Russians had the better of the fighting and overall were expanding the amount of territory they control. In Donetsk Oblast, fighting intensified in recent weeks, with assaults on the front line up by about 30%, apparently part of a Russian spring offensive. Until now, Russian forces have been advancing slowly north and west of Donetsk city, towards the city of Pokrovsk in the west of Donetsk Oblast, and recently have been closing a Ukrainian pocket along the front line southwest of Toretsk. Pokrovsk, however, still remains in Ukrainian hands. The Russian advance towards Pokrovsk is the most notable change in control of the front line in Donetsk for several months, but analysts say innovative tactics by Ukrainian forces, combining the use of drones and ground forces, have inflicted significant losses of troops and equipment and slowed the Russian offensive. It has taken a year for Russia's troops to advance about 40 kilometers. By May 8 in Zaporizhia Oblast, Russian forces were continuing offensive operations focused in western Zaporizhia. The number of Russian assaults using small infantry groups has increased significantly together with motorcycle assaults, due to the terrain. They are using a wave tactic of sending 4 to 5 motorcycles to find gaps in Ukrainian defenses and then following up with dismounted infantry to consolidate positions. Russia now holds some 3/4 of Zaporizhia, and Ukrainian military analysts estimate that the Russians have accumulated as many as 70,000 troops along the Zaporizhia front, plus hundreds of tanks and artillery guns. In Kherson Oblast, however, over the past month, Russian forces have conducted only limited operations and have not advanced. Over the past month, both sides have continued the air, missile and drone campaign targeting strategic assets and harassing civilian populations. Notably, Ukraine conducted a massive drone strike on cities across western Russia on May 6, hitting Moscow, St. Petersburg, Sochi, and several other cities. Some 350 flights were affected and 60,000 passengers were stranded. The strikes seem timed to disrupt the build-up to Russia's 80th anniversary celebrations marking the end of the Great Patriotic War, World War II, on May 9. No casualties were reported. Concurrently, a Russian drone strike on Kyiv killed 2 people. Negotiations towards a limited ceasefire mediated by the United States so far have made little progress. President Trump has bullied Ukraine into agreeing to a limited ceasefire in the Black Sea and to a moratorium on attacks on energy infrastructure. Neither, however, have come into effect. Russia is playing along with negotiating, but is imposing conditions that it knows will be unacceptable to Ukraine and its European allies. Trump appears to be losing patience with Putin. Whether he will attempt to put Putin under pressure as he did Zelensky is yet to be seen. Many observers consider that Russia is using the negotiations to buy time while he seizes more land to improve his negotiating position. On May 1, after months of tense negotiations, the United States signed a deal with Ukraine to share profits from the future sale of Ukraine's mineral and energy reserves. The deal aims to provide an economic incentive for the U.S. to continue to invest in Ukraine's defense and reconstruction, as well as to address Washington's concerns over the amount of aid it has already contributed. Ukraine is believed to have vast reserves of critical minerals like graphite, titanium, and lithium, which are highly sought after because of their use in renewable energy, military technology, and infrastructure. The deal will also see the establishment of an investment fund to spur Ukraine's economic recovery from the war. The deal shows both sides are committed to lasting peace and prosperity in Ukraine and may serve as a deterrent to Russia. Kashmir Muslim terrorism and Indian retaliation brings India and Pakistan to the brink of war. Kashmir has been back in the headlines again in recent days for all the wrong reasons. On April 23, militants opened fire on civilian tourists in the scenic Bizaran Valley in the popular holiday area of Pahalgam in the Himalayas region of India-controlled Kashmir. The area is known as Little Switzerland. 25 Indian males and 1 Nepalese male were killed and 17 other people were wounded. A previously unknown militant group, Kashmir Resistance, claimed responsibility, so the incident was assumed to be another round in the long-running insurgency in the Muslim-majority region. Since 1989, some Kashmiris have employed terrorism in their efforts to either gain independence for Kashmir or to merge it with Pakistan. India named 3 of the assailants and said 2 of them were Pakistanis, members of the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba group. It blamed Pakistan for supporting the militants. Pakistan denied all prior knowledge of the incident. In retaliation, India threatened to suspend the Indus Waters Treaty, and Pakistan warned India that any move to restrict water flow into Pakistan would be considered an act of war. Each country launched a diplomatic offensive against the other. Pakistan suspended trade with India and closed its airspace to Indian airlines. Both countries cancelled the visas of nationals from the other country, border crossings were closed, senior military officials were expelled, and diplomatic missions were reduced from 55 to 30 on May 1, 2025. The Indus Water Treaty of 1960 details how water that flows from India into Pakistan can be used by the two countries. Pakistan relies on the treaty water for 80% of its irrigated agriculture and hydropower needs. The treaty contains no provision for either side to suspend or terminate it. Nevertheless, on April 26, India said it had suspended the treaty and had commenced constructing earthworks to prevent Indus water from flowing to Pakistan. Pakistan's Prime Minister, Shehbaz Sharif, warned, any attempt to stop or divert the flow of water belonging to Pakistan as per the Indus Waters Treaty, will be considered as an act of war and responded with full force across the full spectrum of national power. While India considered its next step, tensions along the line of control which separates Indian Kashmir from Pakistani Kashmir led to exchanges of fire between Indian and Pakistani forces over several nights beginning on April 25. No injuries or fatalities have been reported. Relations between the two nuclear-armed neighbors are said to be at their lowest point in years, and the United Nations has called for maximum restraint from both countries. On May 6, the Indian Army launched Operation Sindoor, a precision missile attack on terrorism infrastructure hitting 9 sites in Pakistan and Pakistan-administered Kashmir. In a post on X after the missiles were fired, the Indian Army said justice is served. Pakistan said the missile attacks on the 6 sites in Pakistan's Punjab had killed at least 31 people and wounded more than 57. It promised a robust response to this act of war. Cross-border artillery fire and skirmishes were subsequently reported at multiple locations along the line of control, with 13 killed and 43 wounded on the Indian side and at least 6 killed on the Pakistani side. Pakistan said that, acting in self-defense, it had shot down 5 Indian Air Force fighter jets and vowed further retaliation. It is the worst fighting between the two nations for decades. World leaders have called for restraint. Gaza post-ceasefire, the war resumes. The Israel-Hamas ceasefire agreement, which went into effect on January 19, 2025, was to be implemented in 3 stages, each of 42 days, 6 weeks. Stage 1 was to involve the release by Hamas of 33 hostages in exchange for Israel releasing up to 1904 Palestinian security prisoners, providing humanitarian aid to the civilian population of Gaza, and for provision of equipment to enable rubble removal and rehabilitation of hospitals and health centers. Stage 2, to follow immediately after Stage 1, was to involve Hamas releasing the remaining live Israeli hostages in exchange for further prisoner releases and the withdrawal of all Israeli forces from Gaza. Stage 3 was to involve Hamas releasing the remains of deceased hostages, Israel ending the blockade of the Gaza Strip, and Hamas not rebuilding its military capabilities. Stage 1, while plagued by distrust on both sides, was largely completed on time, March 2. Israel then elected not to proceed with Stage 2. Instead, it demanded the immediate release of all remaining hostages. When Hamas refused, Israel ended the temporary ceasefire in mid-March. It resumed its fierce strikes on believed Hamas targets and reoccupied swaths of Gazan territory. Israel also reimposed the blockade on humanitarian aid entering Gaza. Since the Stage 1 ceasefire ended, some hundreds more Gazans have been killed, bringing the death toll in the conflict since the conflict began to more 52,000 according to Palestinian health officials. Further, the humanitarian situation, which had improved during the ceasefire, is again dire. The World Food Programme has run out of food stocks because of Israel's blockade. Shortages of water, food, medical supplies and fuel are leading healthcare facing total collapse into widespread hunger, disease and, increasingly, cases of starvation. It is evident, though, that despite the decapitation of its leadership and depletion of its fighting capabilities, Hamas remains a formidable political and military force. It is able not only to engage in diplomacy and govern the enclave, but also to conduct guerrilla warfare against the remaining Israeli forces in the enclave and to bring rocket fire to bear on Israel itself. In response, on May 5, the Israeli cabinet approved plans to capture the entire Gaza Strip and to remain in the territory for an unspecified length of time with a view to freeing the remaining hostages and destroying Hamas as a political and military force. To this end, the Israeli army is calling up tens of thousands of reserve soldiers. Under the plan, hundreds of thousands of Palestinians would be pushed to southern Gaza and Hamas would be prevented from distributing humanitarian aid as doing so strengthens its rule in Gaza. Meanwhile, international negotiators report that neither side is showing any flexibility. Israel says it will not agree to end the war until Hamas is defeated. Hamas demands an agreement that winds down the war. Yemen, a United States Houthi peace agreement reached. Over the past month, the Houthis who govern northwestern Yemen have continued their missile attacks on shipping in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden and have resumed missile and drone attacks on Israel. The United States has responded to the attacks on shipping with a greatly intensified bombing campaign on the Yemeni capital, Sana'a, including its airport, and on Houthi missile launch sites and logistics facilities, including the main port, Hodeidah. A Houthi ballistic missile attack on Tel Aviv's Ben Gurion International Airport on May 4, having broken through Israel's vaunted air defenses, disrupted international air travel, damaged property, and injured several people. A highly embarrassed Israeli government retaliated in force. On May 5, 20 Israeli fighter bombers struck several strategic targets along the coast of Yemen, including at Hodeidah port and a concrete factory close to the nearby city of Bajil. On May 7, President Trump announced that the United States will halt its bombing campaign against the Houthis after the Houthis agreed to stop targeting shipping in the Red Sea. Oman, which has been mediating contacts between the U.S. and the Houthis, confirmed the deal, which it said would ensure freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. Despite this agreement with the U.S. regarding the Red Sea, the Houthis said attacks against Israel would continue. The Congo, the M23 insurgency makes gains in Kivu. For the past 30 or so years, there has been an on-and-off conflict in the Kivu region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC. This region shares a border with Rwanda and Burundi. The conflict involves ethnic tensions between Hutus, supported by Burundi, and Tutsis, supported by Rwanda, conflated with conflicts over mineral wealth, among other things. Tutsis, who were the target of the Rwandan genocide in 1994, are an ethnic minority in the Congo, but have a notable presence in the Kivu region. North Kivu and South Kivu provinces are rich in minerals such as coltan, which is used to make components in smartphones and laptops. It is now a valuable commodity on the global market, and many players have an interest in exploiting such minerals, legally or illegally, not least the Rwandan government of President Paul Kagame. Most recently, the principal opposition to the Congolese government in Kivu has come from the March 23 movement, usually referred to as M23, a Tutsi militia. M23 receives military and other support from the Rwandan government, which uses M23 illegally to exploit Kivu's mineral resources. M23 has become quite professional both militarily and as civil administrators in territory it has seized. M23 also is now part of a larger rebel coalition, the Congo River Alliance, AFC, that opposes the Congolese government in the eastern Congo. On the government's side is the Congolese Army, known as FARDC, the military of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. The army is assisted by United Nations and Southern African Development Community peacekeepers. It is also supported by the FDLR, Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, an ethnic Hutu militia, whose members committed the 1994 Rwandan genocide, and other pro-government militias such as the Wazalendo, a pro-government rebel coalition. The current fighting in the Kivu region was initiated by M23 in 2022, when M23 launched a major military offensive which has been ongoing since then at varying levels of intensity, and for which the Rwandan government has supplied weapons, ammunition, material, and troops. Following a lengthy pause, the offensive was resumed in October 2024 and ramped up dramatically in January 2025, when M23 seized large amounts of territory in both Kivu provinces. In a major battle between the 23rd and the 30th of January, M23 captured Goma, the capital of North Kivu, forcing relocation of the provincial government to a temporary capital. The M23 offensive appears to have culminated at this point. Since January, there has been another pause in the fighting as M23 consolidates its territorial gains, institutes civil administrations in its new territories, and intensifies its mining activities. The DRC government blames Rwanda for the conflict in Kivu. Diplomatic relations between the Congo and Rwanda broke down on January 24, leading the expulsion of Rwandan diplomats from Kinshasa, the Congolese capital, and the recall of DRC diplomats from Rwanda. United Nations sources estimated that between 500 and 1,000 Rwandan troops assisted M23 in the Goma area. On January 27, Congolese and Rwandan troops exchanged fire across their border near Goma. There are fears the Kivu conflict could spread into a wider regional war, given the presence of Rwandan and Burundi troops in the Kivu provinces. Sudan, the civil war continues. Sudan is a country of 50 million people, and a civil war there, which has been ongoing since April 15, 2023, 25 months, has created a humanitarian crisis on a scale exceeding those in Ukraine and Gaza. The civil war is between rival factions in the Sudanese military government, the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, under General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, under Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, aka Hemedti. Outside powers, particularly the United Arab Emirates, UAE, the RSF's chief backer, and Egypt, which supports the SAF, are fueling the hostilities. Most fighting has been concentrated around the capital, Khartoum, and in the Darfur region in the country's west. Starting in October 2023, the momentum began to swing towards the RSF, which defeated SAF forces in Darfur and made gains in Khartoum State, Kordofan in central Sudan, and El Jazeera State, which lies just south of Khartoum. Momentum, however, swung back to the SAF in February 2024, when the SAF made gains in Omdurman, a city across the Nile from Khartoum that forms part of Sudan's wider capital. During 2024, operating from its base in Port Sudan on the Red Sea coast, the SAF gained much of the north and east of the country, before isolating Khartoum from the south by seizing El Jazeera State. Since the beginning of 2025, the SAF and allied militias have made further significant gains against the RSF. By March 26, the SAF had recaptured Khartoum, including reclaiming the presidential palace and international airport and clearing most of the city of RSF fighters. But the RSF is not yet a spent force in Khartoum. On April 30, the presidential palace in central Khartoum was shelled by the RSF, the second such attack on the capital in a week. In the Darfur region, the RSF has had El Fasher, the capital of North Darfur, under siege for some time. Since losing Khartoum in March, the RSF has mounted multiple attacks on El Fasher and the nearby Zamzam and Abu Shuk refugee camps, triggering an exodus of hundreds of thousands of people 60 kilometers west across the desert to the town of Tawila. Tawila is controlled by an armed group that so far has kept out of the civil war. A new RSF attack at the end of April on El Fasher and Abu Shuk is reported to have killed at least 40 civilians. Observers, fearing further violence, point to the need to protect those civilians trapped in and around El Fasher. The RSF is also reported to be on the cusp of seizing the strategic city of Al-Nahid in West Kordofan, a gateway to the Darfur region. This city has been held by the SAF since the start of the conflict, and both sides consider it crucial to gaining the upper hand. Its capture by the RSF would seriously constrain the SAF's plans to recapture Darfur and lift the siege of El Fasher. On May 4, the civil war came to Port Sudan, currently the nation's wartime capital, and heretofore a quiet city. As fighting rocked the city on May 6, multiple explosions and fires were seen and heard in the city, but the exact locations and causes were unclear. The SAF said its anti-aircraft systems intercepted drones directed at the naval base. The civil war has now reached an uneasy stalemate. The SAF is unlikely to defeat the RSF outright. The RSF continues to maintain strong control over about a quarter of the country, especially in the Darfur region in southwestern Sudan, and as the attack underway in Port Sudan shows, the RSF can strike the SAF in its previously secure heartland in the country's northeast. As to the humanitarian situation, on May 2, 2024, a U.S. Senate hearing estimated that the death toll in this civil war could then be as high as 150,000. It would be much more now. Certainly, the conflict so far has left tens of thousands dead, uprooted more than 12 million, and created what the UN World Food Programme describes as the world's worst humanitarian crisis. More than half the population is experiencing crisis levels of hunger. Multiple areas are at risk of famine, and on August 1, 2024, famine was confirmed in a camp sheltering hundreds of thousands of displaced people in North Darfur. By February 26, 2025, famine had been declared in 10 locations and 17 were on the brink. On January 7, 2025, the United States formally declared that the RSF had committed genocide during the civil war, particularly in West Darfur, citing a pattern of systematic ethnic violence in which the RSF has killed civilians as they tried to flee and blocked access to essential supplies. Much of this ethnic violence has targeted the non-Arab Masalit and other ethnic groups. In announcing the determination, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken imposed sanctions on the RSF commander, Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, and other parties that have been providing the RSF with war material. Since Khartoum fell to the SAF in March, there have been reports of extrajudicial executions by both sides in Omdurman and Khartoum. There is no end to the war in sight. Diplomatic efforts to end the war have not been equal to the moment. Attempts to foster talks between the two warring parties have mostly stumbled just past the starting line. A crucial problem has been the failure of external players to push their allies towards serious negotiations. Western powers, including the United States, have sought to organize new talks, but with little success. The latest actor to take up the mediation mantle, Turkey, will need help to make progress where others have faltered. While the SAF now controls the capital and much of the north and east of Sudan, the RSF still controls Darfur and much of western Sudan. Some observers consider this may lead in any political settlement to a division of Sudan into two sectors. In Kenya's capital, Nairobi, in February 2025, political and military groups signed a declaration expressing their intention to establish a governing authority in the areas controlled by the RSF. The UN Secretary-General expressed grave concern over this move as it would further increase the risk of Sudan's fragmentation, but he welcomed a roadmap drawn up in Port Sudan on February 9 as it would facilitate discussions needed to rebuild a cohesive and unified Sudanese state. South Sudan, 2018 peace agreement under strain. Since the end of the South Sudanese civil war in 2018, South Sudan has been governed by a coalition formed by leaders of the former warring factions, Salva Kiir Mayardit, now president, and Riek Machar, now first vice president. In early March, members of a Nuer youth militia attacked a United Nations helicopter in Nasir, a town rocked by fighting between the South Sudanese National Army and a local rebel militia called the White Army. The UN peacekeeping mission was trying to evacuate a government army general and his soldiers when members of the White Army shot at them, killing 28 people, including a UN crew member. President Salva Kiir blamed the attack on the main opposition party, led by First Vice President Riek Machar, and arrested its leadership. On March 27, Mr. Machar himself was placed under house arrest. The Sudan People's Liberation Movement in opposition, SPLM/IO, Mr. Machar's party, immediately said that the arrest of Mr. Machar had effectively collapsed the 2018 peace deal and had taken the country closer to a second civil war. The United States urged the authorities to free Mr. Machar, while the United Nations, the African Union and neighboring countries all expressed concern. On April 27, the government indicated that Mr. Machar could be replaced, pending the outcome of an investigation into his alleged involvement in recent violence. By May 1, Mr. Machar remained under house arrest and allies of President Kiir said they would arraign Mr. Machar after removing him from government, a development that could torpedo efforts to keep the 2018 peace accord in place. Observers suggest that removing Mr. Machar from the government would breach the 2018 peace agreement, implementation of which has stalled over key issues, including security reforms, election preparations, and drafting a permanent constitution. These events put a spotlight on South Sudan's worsening interethnic tensions as well as the fragility of the 2018 peace agreement that mapped out a system of shared governance between Kiir's government, which is largely aligned with the Dinka, the largest ethnic minority in a country of more than 60 ethnic groups, and Machar's SPLM/IO opposition group, the leadership of which largely hails from the Nuer community, the country's second largest ethnic minority. Whether South Sudan's leaders can avoid a second civil war now is uncertain. Indonesia, the Russian connection revived. Indonesia and Australia signed a defense cooperation agreement on August 29, 2024 designed to strengthen their security ties. Against that background, Janes reported on April 15, 2025 that Russia had made an official request to base several long-range military aircraft, bombers and surveillance planes, at the Indonesian Manuhwa Air Force Base on Biak Island at the mouth of Jilbing Bay in Indonesia's easternmost province, Papua. Biak is 1,400 kilometers north-northeast of Darwin and was a major airbase for Japan and later the United States in World War II. Indonesia's defense minister, however, immediately assured Australia that Russia would not be allowed to base aircraft there. While the defense minister's assurance is consistent with long-established Indonesian policy to not allow foreign military bases on its soil, Indonesia's historic and recent relationship with Russia is worth further consideration. Indonesia, like India, has been a member of the non-aligned movement almost since it became independent more than 7 decades ago. Also, like India, it has enjoyed good relations for most of that time with the Soviet Union and more recently the Russian Federation. Indeed, the Soviet Union largely trained and equipped the Indian Navy and, during confrontation with Malaysia, Konfrontasi, in 1963 to 1966, the Soviet Union armed Indonesia. India and Indonesia also have kept trading with Russia during the current Russo-Ukrainian war, thereby assisting Russia to sustain the economic impact of Western sanctions. Since he was inaugurated as the 8th President of Indonesia on October 20, 2024, General, retired, Prabowo Subianto has strengthened ties with Russia. Indeed, Russia and Indonesia held their first ever bilateral naval exercise in November 2024 in the Java Sea near Surabaya, while Indonesia also was conducting major combined military exercises with Australia. Exercise carries Woomera 2024 in Australia and Indonesia, and the United States Marine Corps. Exercise carries Marex 2024 in Batam, Indonesia. At the same time, President Prabowo said he needed to maintain good relations with all countries. Analysts said at the time that the concurrent, but separate, exercises with Russia, Australia, and the United States were part of Indonesia's efforts to maintain a balanced foreign policy. Be that as it may, were Indonesia to allow Russia to either base long-range aircraft at Biak or to rotate them through it, it would pose a serious dilemma for both Australian and United States defense planners, as such aircraft, which typically have a range of 10,000 kilometers, would be able to observe bases and exercises in northern Australia and proximate waters, and also to the north towards the U.S. base at Guam, which is 1,900 kilometers north of Biak. Some observers speculate that intelligence so gained might be shared with China. While basing seems unlikely, more frequent visits by Russian aircraft to Biak now seem probable.
This strategic update was produced by the RUSI New South Wales Special Interest Group on Strategy. The SIG Strategy Group seeks to enhance knowledge of strategy, including the evolution of strategic thought, maintain awareness of current geostrategic issues, and undertake research on nominated issues of current strategic interest.
Lancer Barracks 2, Smith Street, Parramatta, is home to the 1st 15th Royal New South Wales Lancers, an Army Reserve Light Armoured Reconnaissance Regiment equipped with the PMVL Hawkeye. The barracks also house the Lancers Museum and its collection of vintage armoured vehicles. Vehicles the regiment has been equipped with since 1940. Vehicles that are for the most part restored to operational status, able to display their prowess to the public on a monthly basis. The museum is managed and staffed by volunteers, mostly veterans. Public funding is limited to in-kind. The funds to maintain and display the collection comes from access fees, a bit of trading and generous public donations, mainly from the regimental alumni. Vehicles, however, have to be stored in the open, covered in tarpaulins to mitigate rain and tempest damage. The museum needs your help. The museum is building sheds to cover and provide unfettered access to the collection, like these in the South African War Museum Johannesburg. A financial stretch beyond the museum's accumulated surplus. You can help donate at lancers.au.